Hello and welcome to Reinventing Nerds. Today we have a special guest. His name is Mike Kimball. And Mike is an attorney and he has worked for 25 years as an attorney and does, I guess you would say, deals and legal issues for companies in the venture capital space as well as the tech space. And he has a really interesting background, a bit of a path getting to where he is at now. And so hopefully he'll tell us a little bit about that as well as some interesting things for the nerds who are listening on how to be better communicators. So let's take a big welcome for Mike. Hi, Mike.
Hi, Joanie. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here. I appreciate the opportunity.
Oh, I do too. I've actually really enjoyed talking to you and love your stories. So I want to give you an opportunity to share those with our listeners. And I mean, I was actually sharing some stories about you with my husband last night about the Navy and being in the submarines and all. So how did you get to where you're at now? Tell us your eclectic background.
So, as a kid, I always had some fascination with airplanes, which was pretty understandable because my dad had one. And one of my first memories is in a little wind up airplane. I also had a fascination with submarines, and I'm not really sure why. Um, when I was in college, I spent 2 summers working on the space program for the space shuttle and the GPS satellite program. And I graduated from college with a bachelor's degree in chemistry and ended up, as you might expect, in Southern California with job offer from a couple of different oil companies to go work in the oil fields in Bakersfield, which really didn't excite me much. So I went and talked to a Navy recruiter, and as soon as he found out that I had a technical degree and was eligible for the nuclear program, he got out his little bottle of magic pixie dust, and that was the last I ever thought about flying for airplanes and airplanes for the Navy, and found myself on a nuclear submarine here in San Diego. Um, and there were parts of it that were very interesting. The crew was absolutely wonderful, a lot of camaraderie there. Very sharp, motivated people. And of course, when you're underway for 90 days at a time and 200 days a year, there's also quite a bit of boredom. So after a few years here in San Diego, the Navy wanted me to go back and teach students how to operate the nuclear reactors in Idaho. And I did that for 2.5 years and decided to get out. I didn't really want to go back to sea again, particularly since my daughter came along while we were up there. And would have loved to have come back to San Diego, but at the time there were just no jobs here. And so went to Silicon Valley and was hired to turn around a gases and chemicals plant that supplied the wafer fab industry, all the chip makers that at the time were largely in Silicon Valley. And so I did a turnaround, I turned the facility around, kind of worked myself out of a job, but also at the time, all the wafer fabs were moving out of California for reasons of cost and hazardous materials. And I really didn't want to move. So I thought about an MBA or a law degree and decided a law degree would be more flexible and interesting, and went back to law school and came back up to Silicon Valley and bounced around doing a couple of things. Got involved with a couple of companies that ended up being acquired and shuffled around. And then I had most interesting experience. I'd met a friend and we were water ski buddies with our families. Both of us take our families out and go water skiing. And one day we decided we're going to go to Lake Shasta, and we're walking out of Costco with these two big, huge carts full of food. He says, "Hey, Mike, my company's going public tomorrow. First thing they're going to do is hire a lot of people. Here, talk to the VP of HR. Her name's Dawn." And he shoves his cell phone in my face. And so I made an appointment to go back up there and after the houseboating trip, and I got hired. I was the first attorney hired by the general counsel. And in a year, we grew the company from 300 to 3,600 people and 2 attorneys to a legal department of about 30. And along the way, a colleague introduced me to the second general counsel at Yahoo, and he hired me in an executive legal position, and I stayed there for 6 years until I left to hang out my own shingle. And so that's pretty much where I've gotten to. Was living up in the Bay Area until 2 years ago. And, these days in the tech and legal world, nobody really wants to see their attorney. So for some personal reasons, I just moved down here. Um, and
Yeah.
I gotta say, I just absolutely love San Diego.
So you have been intimately involved with tech in a variety of ways, ranging from underwater to in the cloud, all over the place here. So, and now you help companies or help people fund their ventures here in a legal capacity, or what is it that you're doing? Tell us a little bit more.
So my clients are either startup companies or
Mm-hmm.
small venture capital firms. And so I do formations, financings, and
Mm-hmm.
Small M&A deals, as well as the technical contracts between high tech companies.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I've got 3 or 4 small VC funds that are all Yahoo alums, and we call it the Yahoo Mafia. The Yahoo Mafia has been really good to me for networking purposes. So yeah.
Okay. So you told me about the Yahoo. I didn't know they were called the Mafia, but how did they come about? Tell us, like when you were working there, how did you get to know these folks?
Well, it was a really interesting place to work from a legal perspective because, most companies are pretty narrowly focused. If you look at a medical device company, they probably make 1 or 2 or 3 medical devices. Software companies tend to focus on certain things. But Yahoo, by the way they grew up as a consumer-based ad revenue focused company in the late 90s, the atmosphere was really one of, hey, let's try this, throw it up against the wall and see if it sticks. And so there were something like 130 different business units, all of them consumer focused. And so there was this broad range of legal issues that you'd never see in any other company. And, back at the time, I mean, this is a long time ago, Yahoo was still cool and respected. And so we could attract some really serious people from, we had several people from the Department of Justice. We had a couple people from the Securities and Exchange Commission. It was just a fascinating place to learn a lot about practicing law.
Wow. Yeah, that is interesting. And I bet you some of those folks would love to be up there now in Silicon Valley doing some of this work. So let me ask you, you've got folks now who are part of the Mafia, you said, so they're all post Yahoo. It's like a great place to get your network. So much of Silicon Valley is like that. You work at one company and all these people move on, and then you have connections all around, right? I mean, those are some of the folks that you're working with now.
Yeah, my colleagues at Yahoo and the previous company, Commerce One, have migrated around. They've gone to Google, to Facebook, WhatsApp, DocuSign, Salesforce. It's kind of amazing.
Yet they're starting up new ventures as well, or they have the capital to do that?
Yeah, it's interesting. The crowd at Yahoo was really pretty young, and the people that were there at an early day made a great deal of money. And when they left, either right after the .com crash or a few years later when Yahoo had another downturn, they were way too young to quit, although they had enough money to retire. And so many of my colleagues have started our work at VC firms or have gone out and started new companies.
Okay.
You've heard about serial entrepreneur.
Yeah.
There's a lot of folks that have, 2, 3, and 4 exits.
Huh. That's interesting, Mike, because I mean, you've had this experience at big tech, right? Up in Yahoo and other companies you've worked for. And now you're dealing mostly with startups, right? These smaller companies. What do you see as some of the differences, and especially in terms of the leadership, yeah.
Well, when I started at Yahoo, you wouldn't have thought it was a small company, but it was only about 3,500 people worldwide.
Right.
So it really felt like a small company. And Commerce One before that, when we started there, 300 people, it was a small company. And I think that one of the things that happens as a company gets bigger is unless you have a very enlightened HR department and the the C-suite is bought into it, it just becomes natural for more decisions to get made by committee than by leaders. And that slows things down and makes it a little bit more painful. And of course, Yahoo had so many incredibly talented people. It was always a question of, what of these 100 things, which ones are we going to go do? So
yeah, I can imagine. That's so interesting. I was just actually in a meeting earlier with the same issue of the growing pains, and you're talking about the committee versus the leaders. It's a really good point to these companies that are growing a little bit, is realizing that people have to have leadership to take control of things, make decisions, but also be empowered to do so, right? I mean, I think.
Well, empowered to do so, and I think they really need good listening skills.
Mm.
When companies are pitching to a venture capitalist, a lot of the decision that if you had to pick one thing that the VC is going to say, I'm going to bet on this, it's the founder. If they had a successful exit, does their vision hang together? Is it coherent with the business model? And is the founder coachable? And coachable really comes down to good listening skills.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So what do you see, like, in terms of the failures? What happens there?
I think a couple things. One, we all do whatever it happens to be. We always do it better the second time than the first time. I don't remember if you remember the first time you went to a traffic light in a car when you got your driver's license, but I remember mine. And so that's why if you have a founder that's had a successful exit, it's much more de-risked than a first time founder. And I think that the most common thing I see is, in high tech, the technical problem almost always gets solved. It's not like biotech where you may go through the stage 3 trials and the FDA denies approval. But startups run out of money, and they do that either because they didn't manage their spending right and lost confidence of the VCs, or they didn't get the business plan right, and the VCs don't want to fund a follow-on round. And I think one of the most common ways that I see is that when you get very technical people who are ideal to lead, if it's 2 people in a garage, they probably both need to be pretty technical, at least in the high tech world. And if they don't have a deep understanding of how important sales is and hire somebody relatively soon that's got, some serious ability in the sales world, they're going to struggle. The companies that I've seen really make it, I've had one unicorn and one near unicorn. They're all people that jumped on the sales bandwagon early.
Interesting. So what is, aside from the complete obvious here, so what is sales doing that the technical people aren't doing?
Well, sales is a very valuable skill. And I can negotiate well, but I'm not a salesperson.
Mm-hmm.
And most engineers are not salespeople either. So there's a true art to, getting doors open and getting deals made, as well as somebody that's done it for 15 or 20 years has a incredible Rolodex to help get some of those doors open. Mm-hmm. I have a client now here in the area, and they just have an amazing sales team. I don't know how they do it, but they just generate a lot of deals.
So that's interesting. So how does the technical leader realize within themselves that they need help and they need to get the sales folks in there?
Well, I think that's a really personal question. I really can't go and talk about specific people that I've seen.
Right.
I can say that one of the most fun, the unicorn I got on with them. I was their first attorney, and I got on with them when there were 4 people in a little space in New York City. And their CEO had a computer science degree from Princeton. And he just knew how to sell and how to negotiate. And it was just so much fun because he just, the power of no when you don't want to give up a big position is really powerful. When the CEO says, no, we can't do that. It was amazing to watch him close deals, not give up on a big commercial point.
Excellent. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Instead of saying yes all the time.
Right.
Yeah. Huh. So let me hear what the statistics are. Maybe not like in terms of overall, but what's the rule of thumb in terms of how many startups fail that you see?
So I think if you take 10 startups, if you're fortunate, one of them will be a spectacular success, north of 500 million exit, or, maybe even that rare unicorn. One of them will probably have a pretty good exit, not spectacular, but maybe 100 million or so. And you probably have one company that has some interesting technology and don't seem to be on the road to commercializing it. And maybe their VCs or somebody they know introduced them. There's what as an acqui-hire, where company just really wants the technology and the people, but not so much the customers. And then, there's probably 3 or 4 of them that they just simply don't get follow-on funding and go out of business in 2 years or so.
Mm-hmm. So what's your role in all this? How are you helping to make these deals happen?
Well, when you do it for a long time, the issues are by and large the same. You don't see too many new issues. We're not, the legal profession's not, developing fusion reactors or supersonic airplane. So you just see a way that a lot of things get handled. It makes you more efficient. And, when you're somebody like me that understands the value of getting things done, instead of being obstinate about, form over substance, arguing about where the comma should go or exactly how a clause is worded instead of substantive matters, I can help clients get things done very quickly and cost effectively. And I'm also really good at help getting sales deals closed.
Oh, tell me more about that.
So when I got hired at that 300-person company, Commerce One, our general counsel was a guy that liked to do big mergers and acquisitions deals. He came out of the corporate group at Wilson Sonsini, and he didn't really like the sales process. It was just a little too slippery and so forth for him. So he gave it to me, and as soon as he turned it over to me, all the salespeople came down and crowded into my office and wanted me to do all their work. It was kind of a disaster. So I got together with the SVP of worldwide sales, and he had a sales op team. We got together with the controller and hashed out a process and really got things smoothed out. And once you build that trust with a sales team, they're all about it because, they just want to get their stuff done. And if they trust you to get their stuff done and not do stuff that slows things down or puts their commission at risk, it's a great working relationship. And some of the people I've worked with on sales teams are the, best folks I've ever worked with.
Mike, one of the things I'm sort of reading between the lines here, and I'd love for you to correct me if I'm wrong here, but I'm hearing that a lot of this is really good process. If you set up a good process, and these processes aren't like ultra unique either. They're like, it's pretty standard. You've got to have sales involved. How you put together a deal is, not entirely different for every single deal here. But so many people go in thinking that everything is unique. I mean, I see this over and over again, like our company, our people, we're just so special. We have to do things our way. And I'm sort of reading between the lines, like maybe the obstinate part of like getting a little bit out of that and saying, okay, let's just put some standard practices in place that might help us actually move forward.
I think that's really true. I wouldn't want to say that companies aren't unique within their core competency. But in terms of business processes, look, the controller or the CFO at every company is going to be very similar to any other CFO or controller. And the sales process, some products have a very short sales cycle. Sometimes it's, particularly if it's business to consumer. Um, but yeah, trying to do things uniquely just really doesn't work. And I think one of the places where I have some really unique experiences that I've worked with and negotiated with some of the smallest and some of the biggest companies in the world.
Mm.
And you have to remain flexible, because if your potential customer is bigger than you have to get used to getting pushed around a little bit. Arguing over whose contract you're going to use is a loser.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense, and I agree there. We were talking about some of the uniqueness about the company would be their innovation, their intellectual property, but the business processes are probably why reinvent the wheel always, in terms of especially the legal as well. So realizing that perhaps getting over yourself and maybe even taking the ego out of the way on some of this would be an important step. Have you seen any challenges around that?
Well, at Commerce One, our motto was hungry, humble, and smart.
Mm.
And I thought that was brilliant. And I mean, it's interesting. One of the things that I've noticed about founders is most of them just do not have the ability to contemplate failure. And I think that level of perseverance is very helpful in many, many startups. But along with that comes some ego. And so, using the good part of that perseverance and pushing away the part of the ego that gets in the way can be challenging.
Yeah, how to separate that out. That's really interesting. Yeah, the psychological research shows too that a positive outlook is key among entrepreneurs. But you're right, the infallible, that overconfidence, you have to have that fine line of the balance there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
One of the things I would really love to see would be more coaching of founders. I think that might be really helpful.
Yeah, what would you coach them on if you were to coach founders or have somebody coach them on?
Well, I think it's probably, one of the things you'd want to do is go into the company and do a 360 evaluation of, the entire leadership team, or,
Mm-hmm.
If it's 8 people in the company, do the whole company and see what the strengths and weaknesses are.
Well, that's the way I do it. That's the way we always start out. Yeah, that's great. I mean, first of all, finding out where you can leverage those strengths and also what gaps you have and maybe where you need to hire some more talent in those areas too. Yeah, interesting. Wow, I love it that you have all that level of insight from peeking in to see what's going on in these companies from the outside, as well as having been there yourself. So
Yeah, I've always been super curious about stuff.
uh-huh.
I remember getting into trouble as a kid from taking something apart to see how it worked and not being able to put it back together.
Oh, that's the true engineer, right? Taking it all apart. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So hopefully it wasn't stuff that your family was actually using, or was it? Like the car?
It wasn't stuff that important, but, it all worked out. We always had more than one phone.
Okay. Oh, good. Yeah. I'm starting to see some insights here. All right. So who are your people who would want to reach out to you, and why would they call you? So let's hear a little bit about your client.
A CEO or a CFO, whether they're pre-company formation or post. I think one of the other things we haven't talked about is that, these engineers are really bright.
Mm-hmm.
They're probably brighter than me. They could completely do what I do for a living, but they haven't been doing it for many, many years.
Okay.
And so you find people that have taken shortcuts to forming a company and things have gotten done wrong. And it's always more expensive to fix something than it is to do it right the first time. And I would say that, when a company starts the commercialization stage, it's oftentimes a lot easier to work with a solo practitioner because they're generally far more responsive than a large firm.
Mm-hmm.
And with no overhead, the rates are most likely lower.
Oh, well, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm thinking for the smaller companies, that would be a real big advantage too. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, as well as, in California, if you've done any work for a company, every attorney in your firm has a conflict against being on the other
Yeah,
side of
that's true.
the company. So, if you call me and say, hey, can you represent me? I've got this deal coming up with, say, LiveRamp. I know if I've ever represented LiveRamp, I just say yes or no.
Okay.
It takes days for these big firms to run through conflicts checks.
Huh. Yeah.
Um,
I
so
know what you mean. Yeah, I've been working with law firms for a while. So, yeah, got it. Excellent. So how can people reach you if they want to reach out to you?
well, they can use that googly thing and Google my name.
Mm-hmm.
If you Google Michael Kimball, an attorney, I come up in LinkedIn. I think my webpage is up there pretty high,
Mm-hmm.
which is, by the way, KimballESQ.com.
Mm-hmm.
And on my webpage is my phone number.
Right. ESQ for the Esquire, for the folks who aren't as familiar with that. That's what lawyers are called here in the States. I also wanted to plug your website for a second because one of the things on there that I thought was particularly useful was your blog, that you have articles up there, for example, on the importance of the sales process, right? I think that's one of them there too. So you've mentioned that in your discussion today, but if people want to read more about that, they can go to your website and read it as well.
Yeah, that article is titled "How an Attorney Can Help Close Sales Deals - Seriously."
Yeah.
A little story about Commerce One
Mm-hmm.
and the leadership of the sales team and I were incredibly successful at putting together a process that worked, and it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's not necessarily the first thing you'd think of is talking to your lawyer about sales, but I think you've got a really compelling reason to do that.
No, every time I get a new client, I've got to work down to beat down their preconceptions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, excellent. Any last words of advice to some of these folks who are starting out companies and thinking about moving to the next step?
Yeah, talk to everybody you know. Ask. Networking is incredibly powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to people about what they think about your business plan, the technical hurdles. It's hard to get too much advice, and here in San Diego, everybody's incredibly collaborative. It's much easier here than other places to get people to give you good advice.
Oh, that's great to know. Well, thank you, Mike. Thanks for being a guest on Reinventing Nerds.
Well, thank you, Joanie. This was great. It was fun.
Yeah, and thanks to all our listeners and viewers. And you can find us on reinventingnerds.com. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. And we look forward to seeing you next time.